All right, you guys, welcome to another episode of Unfiltered Friday. If you're listening to the podcast, you can't see the video, which is on YouTube if you want to check it out, to see my unfiltered face with no makeup. And my guest, Malia, who told me when we hopped on, I wish I had this filter behind me for my background. So we're really unfiltered over here. But I'm really, really excited to have this conversation and catch up with Malia, who is a good friend of mine that we met in a mastermind. And we're going to chat a lot about working from home with kids, particularly high needs kids, as she is a homeschool mom of two who actually focuses on homeschooling for neurodivergent learners. And we connected inside of our mastermind, and I was going through a time with my son where we were like, this isn't working. Like something at school is not working. And I so appreciate her support and guidance in our journey to figure out what we were going to do, which we're still on, let's be honest. Education with your children is a journey. Parenting is a journey, but I'm excited to learn some tips from her and have a real conversation about what it's like to work with your kids around and how to make that happen as a busy mompreneur. So, Malia, thanks for being here. Can you share a little bit about your business journey and what you do?
Thanks for having me, Ruthie. I'm so excited to catch up because I haven't seen your face in so long. Live and in person and unfiltered. I started my business in 2020 as a low key way to put myself out there as a teacher who had left teaching to homeschool my own kids. So I'll back up a little bit. I started homeschooling my kids in 2020 when my oldest was going to be starting kindergarten. And near us in Northern Virginia, kindergarten was planning to be done virtually. And I was thinking, there's no way that my child is going to sit down at a computer for more than 10 minutes. And they were anticipating, a whole 5-hour school day virtually on the computer. So that is when I decided to dive into homeschooling, and I decided to leave teaching. At the time, I was teaching as an assistive technology resource teacher in the public school system here. So that looked like supporting special education students from preschool to seniors in high school with specialized technology supports. And so when I left, it was like a huge emotional thing for me because I loved what I was doing. Even talking about it, I start to get emotional about it because I was so passionate about that, and I really loved supporting the students and the teachers and the families through that role. And so I decided when I left that I was going to start doing something for myself in the same field. And that has kind of turned into Play to Learn with Malia. So initially in 2020, I just started with homeschool evaluations in the state of Virginia. At the end of the year, you either have to do standardized testing or have a qualified person do a homeschool evaluation for you. And so I started with homeschool evaluations, and it's kind of spiraled into courses to support homeschooling families, how to add more fun into your homeschool day, and then most recently a membership model where I support homeschool families of high energy hands-on learners, and I help you identify your kids' personalized playful learning style, and I provide monthly tips and tools on how to use that style to your advantage in your teaching and kind of use accommodations and modifications to curriculums to best meet your kids' needs. And then I have guest speakers come in also every month. And so it's just a really fun environment to build community because I think that is so, so important. As a teacher and as a parent, having a community that has a like-minded spirit and similar goals and needs is super helpful. So that is where my passions lie.
Well, I know, first of all, I want to unpack you were passionate about what you were doing as a teacher. You loved it. And you wanted to keep working. It's not like you were like, oh, I don't want to work anymore. Oh, I don't want, it was like something happened with your family. And I can only imagine you just had this gut instinct of this is the right thing to do. Even though it was hard, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. And I think even if I'm being totally, totally honest, the idea of my son going to kindergarten was hard. At the time I was working part-time already because I wanted to be present in both places. And that was the way to make that happen. I was half the week working for the school system and half the week home with my son and my infant daughter at the time. And so that was the best of both worlds, right? And so recreating that in this outside of the box way as a mompreneur and entrepreneur has been really exciting because now I still get the best of both worlds, right?
Yeah. And I know throughout your journey, as you've kind of really honed in on who you want to serve and how you want to help homeschool families, you've talked about that you find entrepreneurs or a lot of the people in your community. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
because so many mompreneurs are doing what they're doing because they want to have that flexibility for their families.
Yes.
For them, like homeschool makes sense. So, you know, but when we're an entrepreneur, like at least for me, I know I can put myself in work mode and want to work 24/7. And so when
Yeah.
you're home and you're trying to also homeschool, like you can't do that because there's not 48 hours in one day, there's only 24. So
Yeah.
what tips do you have for people who are trying to build a business or maintain their business or work on their business while their kids are home? I think a lot of people, this happens on Christmas break, if their
Mm-hmm.
kids are in regular school or summer break or spring break, like, and then
Yeah.
you find yourself like crazy. How do I do this?
Yeah. So I know you love planning and calendars. Like
Mhm.
we are kindred spirits in that. And so I think it's important to think about time blocking. I know that's like something a lot of entrepreneurs are used to and are constantly utilizing to help them get through everything they want to get through. And so that is the first tip I have is to look at your day. I usually plan out my week on Sundays and I write in all of the kid activities, all the co-ops we're going to, all of the things. In my mind, my kids are my priority and my business is second to that. And so I put all of the kid stuff first. And then I go back in and I fill in the gaps with business stuff. Now, there are things like fun days where I get to chat with Ruthie that I, prioritize those as business things and plan my kid activities around that for that day. But for the most part, the reason a lot of us got into this entrepreneurial journey is for that freedom and flexibility. So I tend to spend more evenings working or in the gaps where my kids have drop off activity.
Yeah, I think that's a mindset shift because when you go from like a corporate job or a 9 to 5 into the entrepreneur life, it's like, okay, I could work all the time,
Mm.
or I could work in pockets of time that work for my life. But like, I know even for me, having a spouse who still works a traditional 9 to 5, like, I feel like I'm supposed to work between 9 and 5. And like, I've even had this conversation with my husband, like, my creative energy is best in the evening. Like, around 5 o'clock, that's about when I get in the flow. And I'm like, I want to keep working. And he's
Right.
you're supposed to be done. You're supposed to close your laptop. I'm like, but I went to yoga at 9 o'clock. I wouldn't have done that if I had a traditional job. So I think that
Right.
time blocking, it's a mindset shift from what a lot of people are used to if they
Yeah.
leave a traditional corporate job. But if you time block in a way that puts your priorities first, like for you, it's your kids,
Hmm.
or if you are homeschooling their education, then you're in charge of when those things happen versus trying to do it
Yes.
all at once because you can't do it at the same time.
Yeah, totally. And I do think creating some kind of rhythm to your day. So, like, I know that in our family, we are home Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday mornings. And
Mm-hmm.
so I make sure that the bulk of the things that we need to do lesson wise are happening on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesday mornings so that I don't feel guilty on Wednesday afternoon, Thursdays, and Fridays when we're not really diving in and opening our curriculum because I've pre planned that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday morning are the days that we're going to do that and hit those heavier. Now, that's not to say that I won't, sometimes plan a field trip on Mondays because I know that's the day we have the most flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
But just having that mindset that those are like that's the pattern to our week, that we have our home days in the beginning of the week and our activity days on the end of the week has been helpful as well in prioritizing things.
Yeah, I'm curious how you handle like weekdays versus the weekend and even like summer versus like regular school year since you technically don't have to follow those restrictions.
Yeah. So I will say I follow more of a like the typical school calendar only because my kids have friends who are
Mhm.
attending public school, and so I don't want them to feel like we can't hang out with our friends when they're home.
Yeah.
Um, so I try to be cognizant of that and map that out as well in terms of like spring break and winter break because they really want to see their friends from sports and whatever.
Mhm.
And then in the summer, we're really active with swim team. My oldest is really active in swim team. So we take a break in the summer too. But that's not to say that we're not always learning. And I think this is true of non-homeschool families as well. Like you're going out, you're doing things, visiting museums, spending time with friends and going to the library. All of those are things that you're doing all the time anyway. And I'm certain that you're having conversations that are helping your kids learn in those processes. Even going to the grocery store, like just
Mhm.
talking about this is our budget this week and how many apples can we get if we only want to spend $3 on apples this week. Like those are conversations that any family can have.
Yeah.
And those all I think count as learning experiences, and sometimes
Mhm.
I think are even the most meaningful ones because they're the real life things, right? The things we're always going to be doing in our lives as we grow. So I think there's a lot of learning happening even when we're off school
Yeah.
that we sometimes forget about.
Yeah. And your kids how old are your kids now?
So my oldest is 8 and my youngest is 4.
Okay. So your oldest and my son about the same age. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you have conversations with him in particular about like mommy's business and what mommy does and like entrepreneurship and what do those conversations look like?
Yeah, we do. So I will say, like, in my time blocking, I'll be like, this is the time, the scheduled time where you can do your screen time or your rest time or whatever it is you want to do because mommy's going to be working and it needs to be quiet time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always quiet time when mommy's working, but like on a day like today when I'm podcasting, I don't want my kids screaming in the background for the
Mm-hmm.
sake of your listeners, right?
Yeah.
Um, but so we talk about it in that sense. And when I'm doing evaluations in the spring and I have more of that one-on-one time with other families, we talk about it a lot in that way
Mm-hmm.
that I'm helping them learn and close out their school year, just like we do the same things in our family.
Yeah.
And so he's got that. I would love to dive more into what it's like to be an entrepreneur and how like the business aspect of it. So I'm curious, do you talk about that with your son?
Well, it's interesting because so I left my corporate role and I've shared this story on the podcast, but just like quick recap for new listeners. I left my corporate job because in kindergarten, my son was struggling. And we were in a school that was not a good fit. And so we
Mm.
changed schools. When we went to the new school did not have aftercare. And so he was going to not have any, like, didn't have childcare basically after 3 o'clock while I worked a 9 to 5. So in that moment, when we tried some other options like external aftercare and different things and like it just wasn't working out, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to my boss and say, I have to leave every day at 3 o'clock. I will finish my workday from home. And I worked in a company that didn't have a super hybrid flex culture. So that was like kind of a big deal for me to go say that. And my husband at the time, or he said, what if your boss says no? And I was like, well, then I don't work there anymore. Like I just knew in my gut in that moment that like this is why I'm going to leave. And I didn't leave right away. Like it was a negotiation and a back and forth, but eventually in that season I ended up resigning. And so when I had the conversation with Noah, and this is when he was in kindergarten, it was like, "Hey, mommy is going to be working from home now." And it wasn't even like mommy works for herself, it's just mommy works from home. And he thought that was really great and I could walk him to school and
Yeah.
pick him up and that was great. And then as we moved into first grade, like it was all still good. And we talk a little bit about like mommy has her own business, or we talk a little bit like I don't have a boss, but I have clients. So like when we have a client call, like that's really important versus, me just being on the computer. It's
Yeah.
interesting as we have moved into second grade, he has kind of gotten it in his head that it's not fair that mommy stays home all day, that you get to stay home. And I'm like, you're right. I am at home, but like I'm actually working. And then he's like, but your work is just looking at the computer. Your work is easy. And I was like, okay, having your own business, not easy. Let me tell you, not easy. Like there's plenty of challenges here. But it's so interesting because he compares me to his dad, where daddy leaves every day, goes to
Mm-hmm.
a job site. My husband is in construction project management. So daddy builds buildings. He manages workers that build buildings. But it's like mommy does podcasts and marketing, and I don't really know what that means.
Yeah. That is interesting. I do think my son comes up with entrepreneurial ideas
Mhm.
often. Like, I found all these rocks outside and now I'm going to go sell them for 50 cents each to these people on the street. So, like, I think that, like, maybe that kind of perspective of, like, in play when we're coming up with things like that, or like the idea of a lemonade stand or things that, kids often get into, like, maybe having that conversation would be, this is similar to what mommy does. Mommy just does it on the computer, right?
Yeah.
um so I don't know, that's an interesting perspective that he has. Like,
Yeah, it is. And we're continuing to talk about it. And like it's funny because he's gone to work with his dad. And like he goes and sits in his dad's office and sees his dad have meetings and talk on the phone to contractors and whatever. And like he's like, when am I going to help you with work? And I'm like, I don't really know what you could do to help me. Like, you're going to write some social media captions for me? I don't know what's going to happen here. I don't know. Maybe it would be funny. I should do an Unfiltered Friday where I interview Noah on the podcast.
that would be funny. Maybe he can be, I mean, he's made some appearances in your social media, so that's
Yes.
work, right?
Yes. Well, and that's actually a conversation that my husband and I had, and I'd love to get your perspective on this too, because you show your kids in your social media as well.
Mhm.
They're part of your brand. And it's interesting because I think you're kind of like me. You don't show your husband a whole lot.
Mm-mm.
And I don't either. And my husband and I had a conversation about it one time. And I was like, listen, if you are uncomfortable with me showing Noah on social media, you need to tell me that. Because ultimately, for me, in my brand story, being a mom and my mission to serve other moms is part of my company and part of who I am and part of my brand. And I said, being a wife, like, that isn't part of the brand story. It's part of me as a human, but like, I don't talk about my marriage. I don't talk about him a whole lot. I don't share a ton. But like Noah and my child and being a mom is part of my content. I'm curious if you've like considered those things too.
You know what's funny is, like, I waffle back and forth all the time about showing my kids' faces just because of, like, the world we live in.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to a point where now I ask them, like, is it okay if I share this? And sometimes
Mhm.
they say no, and sometimes they say yes. So the stuff that I do share on social media, I've gotten their approval, if you will,
Yeah.
to share. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I haven't really shown much of my husband just because most of what I'm filming is my kids and me in our day to day. And even
Yeah.
that, like, honestly, that stuff I find challenging to pick up my phone and videotape everything we're doing. So, like, what I share is a very small piece of our day to day, right? Unless I'm making an effort to, like, showcase a full homeschool day, I'm like picking up my phone maybe twice during the day to take pictures.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I think content is something I struggle with a lot in terms of social media, for that reason, and just like it feels overwhelming to film so much of your day to day.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
I don't want to be a reality TV star. I just want to help other moms with their
yeah,
high energy kids. So
for sure.
finding that balance.
You did a 9 grid for a while, didn't you?
I did, and you know what? I've been thinking about going back to it because
Yeah.
I go through phases, I think, where social media is really fun. Like, the
Mhm.
creative part of putting together a reel can be super fun, and I love that. But then the pressure to do it multiple times a week, multiple times a day, I mean, depending on what kind of business coaching you're following,
Mhm.
that can be a lot. And so I really loved the 9 grid for that, for feeling like I could be present on my page. If people went there, it was that magazine style, they knew what I stood for, they could
Mhm.
get a quick win, and then I could just worry about my stories if I wanted to.
Yeah.
I do waffle back and forth with that, and how often to post and be present on social media versus spend time in my email. I'm very consistent with my newsletter. Like, I like to be present in that space, but
Mhm.
sometimes it feels like a lot to put so much of yourself out there.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a client who we just did a 9 grid for her because she was having a really hard time to the same thing, like being consistent with social and email. And she was like, I'm like struggling with this. And so the first thing we actually did with her, it was we mapped out her email, and then she would write and batch write her emails and then would pull pieces of email
I love that.
into posts. And I
Mhm.
was like, and she's like, that made it so much easier for my brain to wrap my head around. And
Yeah.
when we did the 9 grid for her, it was like, now there's even less pressure on creating post content, but she can still do the same thing, take copy from those emails and make them a caption for a reel if she posts,
Yeah.
or do like a story that's, text on screen, and you just copy paste from the email that she already wrote. And so it
Yeah.
goes back into that, like, understanding the intensity that you can maintain with consistency. And when you put up a 9 grid, doing those other things becomes easier, because then you're
Yeah.
not like thinking about it.
Mhm.
And you can do reels when they're fun. You can do it when you're inspired versus like, I
Yeah.
have to post today.
Yeah, I do. I feel like I've created some sort of hybrid social media presence where like I'll be like posting reels every couple days for a couple weeks, and then I take a week off and just like let it be. Um and I mean, I don't announce that to people, but that's
Right.
kind of like how I figured out is working for me in this phase of my life and what my capacity is for that. And I really love the idea of focusing my energy more on the things that are my own, like my blogging and my website, and putting my time and energy there, because it is limited, working from home, homeschooling, and trying to fit everything into small blocks and still sleep at night.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I do think it definitely depends on my season
Yeah. And
of what I'm
that's the thing that
doing.
I want people to understand, that when you see content creators, or let's even say you see influencers, and they're posting 7 days a week, tons of reels, tons of stories, they have a team.
Yeah,
They have, I guarantee you, they have a team. They are not a solopreneur. And I don't mean they have of one virtual assistant. I mean, they have a team of people helping them. And that's something that, like, I actually appreciate the entrepreneur space starting to share more openly about their
yeah,
team, because I think for a long time people didn't share that, and we would look at the world of social media and be like, how is this woman doing all these
yeah,
things, and then beat ourselves up because we couldn't do it all. Well, she's not doing it all, she has help.
yeah. I'm also really appreciating this new phase of B-roll where people are just filming themselves doing anything they normally do and putting their content on top of it, instead of these like perfectly curated, for my space, like perfectly curated sensory bins and like neutral clothing and clean houses. And like I don't think I've ever truly been that person. I will share the raw and the real all the time over and over. But there's the pressure, right, to try to keep up with that, even if that's not who you are.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a hard part as an entrepreneur, is the
Yeah.
comparison, like trying not to compare and trying to be yourself, but also like, because that's how the algorithm works, you're going to see all of the people doing the same thing as you. Um,
Yes.
and
That's
so like trying to turn off that comparison mentality.
I don't remember who it is, but there's a couple different people that I follow. Oh, one of them is Allison Cullen, who is the host of the You Do Woo podcast. I don't know if she still does it, but for a while she followed no one on Instagram. So she puts out content.
Mm,
She says in her podcast all the time, send me a DM on Instagram, let's connect. And if you DM her, she connects and she'll, touch base with you and have a conversation, but she doesn't follow anybody.
that's genius.
And I'm like, what a good idea, because then you don't get stuck in the like scroll hole. And there
Yes.
was somebody else that I heard that did it. Oh, okay. So I listened to the 4 Things with Amy Brown podcast. Her co-host on one of the like episodes of the week, they do a couple. Her name's Kat Defada. She's a therapist.
Mm,
She hosts the You Need Therapy podcast, and she did it as an experiment. For like
okay.
30 days, she unfollowed everybody. And she was like, it was really interesting to like see, when I'm not seeing content, I'm not comparing myself, and how much like lighter I felt.
Yeah. It can be a lot.
It can be a lot. And
Yeah.
that's why, understanding strategies for your own business, for your own brain, for the way you work, the season that you're in, can be helpful, because then when you see people selling, I guess, strategies of like 30 reels in 30 days or blah, 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 you can be like, that's not for me. That's not
Right.
for me. That's okay.
You know what? I think that is something that I learned from the mastermind we were in, is that it's all about figuring out what you're about and being
Mhm.
true to that and owning that, and not necessarily these are the 5 steps you need to be successful, and
Yeah.
you can't deviate from them or you won't be.
Yeah.
It was really more a group about empowering you and who you are and what your capacity is, and
Mhm.
leaning into that. And I'm so grateful for that experience, and especially like I know you've spun that into this 9 grid, and promoting that, and it's just been so refreshing.
Yeah. That's okay. So that's another interesting thing to kind of dive into, owning who you are and like what makes you different. Like, I will tell you that I kind of struggle with that and like, I'm not that special, I'm not that interesting. And I want to talk a little bit about when you decided to niche into serving parents of neurodivergent learners. Because that was a little bit of like do I want to go down this?
Yeah, it
So talk
was.
to me a little bit about like that decision.
So initially, like my background is in special ed. I taught in the early childhood autism program in my county before switching to assistive technology. I'm also a board certified behavior analyst. So like my background is in that neurodivergence
Yeah.
space. Um, but as a homeschool parent at the time, I was like, it feels like weird to dive into that area and not be living it. And
Hmm.
wouldn't you know, the universe like shows up in the craziest spaces, right? Because in the last year, my son and myself have both been diagnosed with ADHD. So like,
Yeah.
mind blown. Like I am living in this space. I just knew enough about how to set up accommodations, modifications, all the things, so that we were having success. But I wasn't aware of that because I had
Mhm.
that background. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
You were
like,
doing it like intuitively.
right. And so then it was like, oh, okay, I can do this. I didn't want to feel like I was speaking about things that weren't happening in my real homeschool. And
Hmm.
so that was my hesitation. And then lo and behold, the universe is like, well, let me just show you that you are speaking to this and you are living it, and you're not a fraud for talking about it as things you're doing in your own homeschool. Not that we needed these labels or diagnoses to be successful,
Yeah.
but it was just eye opening for me, because I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. And it's funny. One of my favorite Oprah quotes is that the universe speaks to you in a whisper. And if you don't
Mhm.
listen, it's going to speak a little louder. And if you
Yeah,
still don't listen, eventually it's going to hit you with a brick wall until you
right.
listen. So it's like the whispers were there. And in
Yeah.
hindsight, you can see them. But like in the moment, it's like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, so
And
that's
then
really,
it's like the whole self reflection thing. Like, if I really sit and look back and self reflect on how I ended up on the course I ended up on, right? Getting into teaching and doing all the things I did and getting all of the credentials I got,
Mhm.
it was because not only was I serving other people, but it was serving me. Like it was helping me grow as a person.
Yeah.
And so that was like some really cool reflection.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, we're in a very similar journey. We actually have meetings with my son's doctors trying to figure out the like are we in the ADHD world, or cuz for a long time it was like, "Oh, he's just a really active kid. Oh, he just really
Yeah.
likes to move." And it's interesting because as school is getting harder, it's becoming more apparent of like
Hmm.
we need some different coping mechanisms, we need some support tools. And so as I'm like diving into the world of like neurodivergence and what does this look like, I listened to the Mel Robbins podcast where she was like, do I have ADHD? And I'm listening to it and I'm like, oh my god, I think I have ADHD. Like, who freaking knew?
Hmm.
And I haven't been like medically diagnosed, but like
Yeah.
self-diagnosed. Yeah. And that's why I have anxiety, because it was presenting itself in that way. And it's like,
Hmm.
it just goes back to our kids are here to teach us things.
Yes.
I
Totally.
listened to this parenting podcast with a couple different parenting experts, and I don't remember which one said it, but they said, you aren't given the child that you want, you are given the child that you need.
Oh
And it was
man,
like,
yes.
oh man, that is so true.
You know, when you say that, like I feel like I'm so much of an introvert. When I'm with people, my extrovertedness comes out, you know, the
Mhm.
introverted extrovert. But my kids are so extroverted to the point where like during lockdown, my child was opening the window and just like yelling out hello to people walking their dogs on the street. Like we didn't even know them. He was like any person that walked
Yeah.
by, he wanted to talk to. Um, and I remember this time when he was like 2 and we went to a mommy and me yoga and I sat everything in the back and rolled out my mat and I was prepared. And he at the end, before the end, was at the front with the instructors, like totally ditched me and was doing his own thing. And so like when you say that, I'm like, this is so true. Like he forces me to get out and
Mhm.
be more extroverted, right? So that's so
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, because those experiences that you've probably found by putting yourself out there, by getting out, I'm sure have enhanced your life, but like you
Yeah,
maybe wouldn't have done it on your own.
totally. Yeah. And again, like I like to go out and do stuff, but it's like that process of getting me out of the house. Like I'm
Yeah.
like,
Do you
ugh.
do you what's your human design?
Oh man, you would ask me that. I don't remember.
Okay. I'm interested if the numbers, the profile lines, if you have a 2 in your numbers, because the 2 is the hermit of like you need alone time, you need time to self-reflect, you need quiet. And I when
No.
I learned my human design, I'm a 6-2, and I learned that about it, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's true." But like I never would have thought it not
Yeah.
knowing that.
I know in the Enneagrams I'm a 9 wing 1
Okay.
and the 9s are more introverted
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I can't
That's
remember the human design. Now I'm going to have to go look it up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too because I like think back to my corporate career of like I when I was a store manager, like my favorite day of the week was Sunday because if you work on open to close on Sunday, you get time before the store opens when it's quiet and you get time after the store closes when it's quiet. So like you get to bookend your day with that like more alone time when you don't have customers, but like you still get to serve people. And I used to always think like I
Mhm.
love being around people. And I do, but I need those like alone time
Yes.
spaces too.
Yes. I think that's true also with like homeschooling and my kids are very social, so we do a lot of sports. We're participating in some co-ops and I enjoy them. I love to connect with other people.
Mhm.
Um, other moms, all of that stuff. But I do find afterwards that I'm like, okay, we need to just sit and do nothing. Like
Yeah,
mommy needs to lock herself in the room for an hour and then I can be like regular again. But like I
yeah,
just need that like downtime to process and
for sure,
recover.
for sure. Well, that's actually a really good segue to our like final get to know you questions. It when you're in that downtime, that decompressed space, if you're gonna pick a show to binge, like what is
Mm,
your binge worthy show lately?
below deck.
Oh, okay.
Mm. If it's like a new season of like Emily in Paris or Virgin River, like I'm into all of those rom-commy,
Yeah,
dramedy type things. But if I'm coming back to something reality TV, it's Below Deck over and over. I love the beach, so it's like I get a little bit of that, but you also get the drama of like I don't know, thinking old school. What was that one on MTV where they all live together? The Real World.
yeah,
So like that nostalgia of like
yeah.
a
That's fun.
bunch of a bunch of people living together. I don't know.
That's fun. Well, okay. So along with your binge worthy show, what's your current binge worthy snack?
Hmm. Well, it's pumpkin spice season, and
Mhm.
if you haven't tried the Goldfish Dunkin' Donuts crossover goldfish, they're pumpkin spice graham cracker flavor, and they are amazing.
You can get them at Target. I looked it up after you shared the stories, and I went and got a bag. And I can agree that they're very good. Are you a yogurt person? Do you eat yogurt?
I do, yeah.
Okay, so Dannon Greek yogurt light and fit, they have a pumpkin flavor that is
Okay.
like to die for. And I like something crunchy in my yogurt. So those goldfish on top actually is like game changing treat. It's so good.
Yum. I like the what are those? Is it Chobani that makes the ones that fold over? They have like the crunchy
Yeah.
side and like the yeah. So that's like a DIY. I love it.
Yeah. So, okay. Along with your snack, because we like to talk about food and drinks here, what is your current favorite adult beverage and non-adult beverage?
Okay, so adult beverage, we just discovered that they make an adult version of Sunny D. It's like a Sunny D with vodka in it. Highly recommend. If you want some 90s nostalgia, go for that.
Yes, how fun.
And then my non-adult version has to be the pumpkin spice latte right now because
Yes.
it's the season.
Yes. You can't go wrong. Do you like it hot or iced?
Hot.
Yeah.
I don't know, like I can do the caramel macchiato cold, but there's something about pumpkin spice to me that like in my brain it has to be warm.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. Okay, and then last question, because I also love travel, I always love to know either a trip that you've gone on recently or one that you're planning that you're excited about.
Well, I feel like this is making me want to plan a trip. I don't have a specific location planned, but my best friend and I turned 40 this year, and so we are planning to take a trip, a mom's only trip. We were looking at like the Alabama coastline as a fun place because neither of us have been there. Florida is our second choice.
Yeah.
East Coast Florida, Cocoa Beach area. But Florida was the last place I went to visit my parents. So
Yeah. Are you a beach, like you love the beach?
I do. I'm a beach girl. I was born in Hawaii, so I feel like it's just like ingrained in me.
It's just
I need to be near the ocean.
Yeah, oh, that's so cool. I didn't know that. Well, Malia, this was such a fun conversation. Tell everybody if they want to connect with you, learn more about the Homeschool Hub, where do you hang out, and how can they learn more?
Yeah, so I hang out mostly on Instagram at Malia Phelps Homeschool. And you can see me on there often, and there's links in my bio for all the things. But my homeschool toolbox is my freebie, if you will, the place that I provide a lot of information about everything I do. You get your checklist for how to get started homeschooling if you're brand new. If you already homeschool and you're just looking to add in more fun to appeal to your high energy kids, there's a piece of that in there as well. So it's a little bit for everything.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you again so much for being here. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me.